welcome to the Raising Kellan podcast. My name is Marsh Naidoo and I blog at raisingkellan.org, where we curate resources for parents raising children with disabilities. On today's episode 126, I'm joined by Dinalynn Rosenbush, who is a parenting coach, speaker, and a speech and language pathologist with over 30 years of experience. Dinalynn hosts The Language of Play, a top 1.5% podcast. Her mission is to help parents understand how children communicate so that they can connect more deeply in the presence of speech delay. This episode is brought to you by Teletherapy Services, your online physical therapy provider. As always, remember the content provided on this podcast is for your information only, and if you seek advice for your specific situation, to contact a trained professional. So grab that cup of coffee, put your feet up, and get ready for some awesome conversation. I am super excited to be speaking with my friend Dinalynn Rosenbush this morning. Dinalynn is a speech and language pathologist, a parent coach. And today we are going to be talking all things communication. Welcome to the Raising Kellan podcast, Dinalynn.
Oh, Marsh, it is a delight to be here. We've talked about this for a long time, and we never really got it to happen until today. So seeing you is such a delight again.
Well, Dinalynn, tell the listeners, please, a little bit about your origin story, and tell them a little bit as well about the Language of Play podcast.
I would be happy to. Thank you for asking. So my origin story is probably fairly typical. I was a young person in high school wondering, what do I want to do? And I had no idea. I went to college as a undecided major. I don't know what I wanted to do. I'm learning as I go. And then finally I had completed most of the communication disorders programming. And the professor said, maybe you should make this your major because you're nearly done. So I went into something kind of without realizing that it was really a field. I was just kind of taking classes that were interesting to me. And then I got into doing work in the schools with children. And I decided that not because I had experience with children at the time, but because I thought, well, when I get married, I'm going to want to be able to be home when the kids are home and off when the kids are off. So my decision making was for those reasons. However, I then started to just love working with children, and watching children grow has been just a delight and a warming in my heart. And one of the other things that I saw over time was how many parents would come just really upset, wondering, oh no, I'm scared for my child. And I wasn't scared for their child because I had seen children come through these problems. But of course, they were scared for their children. And then, of course, along the way there, I did become a parent, and I understood how absolutely compelling these fears are because we so want what is best for our kids. Fast forward some years, I started seeing that there's a decline in speech language pathologists. And we are getting burned out because our caseloads are getting very high. And then I learned that, staffing across the nation doesn't anywhere near meet the needs. So we have a problem on our hands. And I know that the speech paths that I do know are working really hard. And I also knew that with my students, when my caseloads were really high, I thought, I know what to do. I know how to do it. And I don't know how to spread myself out anymore. And so you end up having groups of kids together to try to give people what they need. But truly what they need is practice. Yeah. And they need any frequency of practice. So then I started thinking, how can I change what I do? So in my speech therapy practice in the school, I started inviting parents to come into my classroom with me to work with their kids. And we did that. Some parents were once a week, some parents were once a month. And for those that were able, especially the once a week parents, they saw huge increases very quickly. And so I thought, man, this is really the ticket. because I wanted to be able to train parents to get that frequency that kids need in practice, that consistent, frequent experience that will help turn around some of that neurology. Because really, for some kiddos, depending, of course, what the disorder is, you're trying to reprogram the brain to operate a little differently. Probably a way to relate to it would be if you injure your spinal cord somehow and you are not able to maybe write with your hands, over time you retrain a different part of your brain to write with your hands. Our brain is plastic and we're very resilient that way. So I thought, it is frequency and practice. And so what if I can't do it, how can I change my programming so that I can get the practices in and I can work on the next harder step? So the parents that would come in, they would get those practices that, okay, we have nearly mastered it. It goes home with mom and dad. I give them just a teeny weeny bit to work on. And then the next week they come back. That is how they got those remarkable changes, because they did these little steps along the way. So now fast forward a little more, I decided I want to build a program to teach parents to do this, because parents are the most invested people in the kids' lives.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. And so I developed a program called The Language of Play, and that helps parents know, what do you do and how do you do it, so that they can help their kiddos have the practices at home. Now, it doesn't just go with that, because part of the thing that I learned along the way was many parents needed also to be grounded in themselves, and they needed to understand that they are okay. It is not their fault. We can let go of blame, shame, guilt, all the things that hold us back. So, of course, those components need to be added into the program, and so I have, and it's a beautiful program. I just love it. So, yeah, so that's where I am now. When you ask about parent coaching, when it comes to communication, that is what that anchoring point is, that to help parents know how to help their kids communicate better and to do it in their home environment, not with worksheets at the table, but rather to be able to put it into your daily life. How do we use the experience of a bath, dinner time, toilet time, toothbrushing, getting your shoes on, getting your coat on, whatever it is, so that communication is embedded into everyday living, everyday moments.
So Dinalynn, I'm gonna back up some. So here comes along little Johnny or Susie, and parents start to notice that perhaps there are attempts at communication. They are maybe more, they may be of sound formation, but they want to encourage more. What would your advice to parents be at that point?
My advice, that's a really good question, because it's multifaceted. One thing is, it depends on the age of the child.
Okay.
The age of the child will determine what my next move would be. If they are really concerned, they should go to a speech pathologist in their town, get an evaluation. Maybe it's just a screening that they need, so that somebody can tell them yes or no. But I wouldn't go to only the internet or only your general practitioner doctor. I would, if you have concerns in this area, go to a speech pathologist. Another thing people can do is go to my podcast. So The Language of Play. There's a lot of resources on that podcast. So you can listen to, since you brought up sound production, maybe the child is not saying a K sound. I think I have a one called, is your cat a dat? Because that's a common thing that kids say. If they're not able to say those back sounds that come in their throat, they might put them in the front. Maybe the children aren't saying any sounds. That certainly is a speech pathologist question. And along the way, I want to say to parents, whether your child does or does not have a speech language delay, oftentimes when it comes to speech sounds, parents are hesitant to correct their child. It's interesting how they're either afraid they're going to do it wrong, so they'll ruin it, or they're afraid that they're going to shame or make their child feel bad. I want to encourage you to think of it just like holding a fork. You turn your child's hand around. You say, hold it this way, it'll be easier. Or this way is the right way to collect the food. Or use a spoon instead because it'll hold your soup better. We just tell our children these kind of things. Do the same with this speech. Do the same with the word choice that they might use. Just let them know.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question, perhaps that our parents with children that are autistic might have questions regarding, especially if being nonverbal is part of the presentation, Dinalynn, with regards to communication devices, because it's often said this might be something that you become reliant on, but I don't know. What are your thoughts about communication devices
So thank you. That is another fabulous question. When you're talking about children that are nonverbal, there are other routes to go as a vehicle to ride to get to the verbal if they're going to be capable of verbal. And we always go into it assuming that they're going to be capable of verbal. And so we do these other methods as if they are the vehicle to get them there. So a communication device is one strategy. It is a very, very good strategy for many kids. And what that is a system. Oftentimes these days it's done on an iPad, where the device will do the speech for the child, and the child simply has to pick a picture and have the device talk. What ends up happening sometimes with autism, and I've seen this in my practice where I've had students echo with echolalia, they echo what the device says, and that becomes the vehicle to be able to say what they want to say. And that is a strategy you would work with a speech pathologist. That is not a go-it-yourself kind of strategy, because that's complicated, that's complex. But it can be done, and it is doable. Another strategy that would be visual and more gross motor than the fine motor of the mouth would be signs and sign language, if your child has that kind of movement and motion. And if they're able to use some signs to communicate for them, again, it becomes a vehicle to be able to then springboard into speech. If your child's having tantrums because they're frustrated because they're not communicating, you can be actually quite glad, because it tells you that they have a greater understanding of what they want to communicate. They just don't know how, so you give them the how. But the fact that they got mad tells you that there's some intelligence that's cooking and making them angry, so you can celebrate in that. That is an encouraging feature. I think of it like steering a bus. If the bus is moving, you can steer it a whole lot more easily than if it's still. Those temper tantrums are kind of like the bus is moving. Now let's steer it.
That is so amazing. And I think that's so encouraging as well. Do you know? I mean, just from a parent perspective to hear that. Dinalynn, if I had to ask you, look, I know you have such a robust catalog of information on the podcast, but the audience on Raising Kellan tends to be more parents. So if I had to ask like your top 2 or 3 podcasts, that they could kind of dig into first before they go through the catalog, just as an introduction, what would some of those episodes be?
So the most popular episodes, like for all time, have been a 1-year-old language learning with a book, which is episode 4. And that one just got a lot of traction. So I think it's continuing to be spread. On that episode, parents learn how when our children are not seeming to be interested, they're not really paying attention. You can't really read a book the way the book was written. How do you actually use a book to teach a low-level language learner to understand the concept that these physical representations, this 2-dimensional board book here in front of me, represents real life? And so we talk about how we make that connection and how then that language gets expanded. The second one that is real popular is, what is play and why is it important? And my title, The Language of Play, has all to do with that. And that is because play is the language of children. Play is also not the opposite of work for adults. The opposite of play would be depression. So we also need to play in our lives. But this podcast has been focused on children and parents at this point. So play is so profoundly important for all of us to be able to relax, to experiment, to explore, to be able to communicate in a mindset, in an openness that allows for discovery, which means it's not going to go right all the time. And in that theme, it's interesting that the third most popular is, what does improv have to do with parenting? And that was Chris True that was a guest, and he is an improv artist, episode 90. And he said he gives strategies to interact, which forces us to stay present, forces us to play linguistically with our kiddos. And that can be even when your child isn't speaking, because you're staying present with them. And then the most popular episode this month has been episode 184, and that is, do your habits reduce your child's need to speak?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, sometimes this is something that came up because I continuously see that we do things that shut down our kids in ways that we don't want to. So let's look at that and let's give some strategies so that we know how to build in those opportunities for growth in their communication. So there you go. There's some places to start. I've got almost, I'm coming up on 190 episodes now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Dinalynn, what has you excited about the future?
Oh my goodness. Since my brain is in this game right now, there's many things. When I think about the parts of my life, there's other parts too, other than this work. But when I think about this work, what excites me is the connecting point between parents and kids and families. And my relationship, when I build those relationships with families, I find so much joy in it. So I am really looking forward to this community growing and building as I am, really embarking on doing this growth of a community. I'm looking forward to the connections, the relationships, and watching the transformation that happens. And that's just so fun. And I know it happens because I've seen it in my office, but now as I'm transitioning into, now I'm doing it as a business, it's a very different thing because I'm working differently with parents, and it's just so fun.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dinalynn. You have been a wealth of information. And parents, please check out the Language of Play podcast. You will not be disappointed. Dinalynn, thank you once again.
Thank you, Marsh. It is always an honor and delight every time that I see you. Thank you for having me on Raising Kellan.
Thank you for listening along on the podcast today. Be sure to check out Dinalynn's podcast, The Language of Play. And we would sincerely appreciate you leaving a rate and review of both our podcasts on Apple. This way, parents seeking the information are more likely to find it. As always, remember, get to the top of your mountain. This is Marsh Naidoo, signing off.